All right. Hey, everybody. If you are able to find a seat, I hope you are excited both for our last keynote speaker and to win some books possibly, and to be in a beautiful historic room drinking and eating, and I guess then to go home. I'm going to turn things over to Morgan.
So first of all, thank you everybody for coming to the 2025 annual WHA meeting. I think this was a really wonderful meeting. We got a lot of really productive stuff done, and it was a beautiful location. I would also like to take a minute to thank our sponsors, the OER Project, who sponsor free registrations for local high school teachers, as well as our closing reception, which we will have in a little bit. The GUST Global Studies Center, which sponsored the beverage breaks we've been having for the last 3 days, and the, thank you, GUST, and the University of Louisville College of Arts and Sciences, who sponsored our bags. And then also thank you to our exhibitors, the University of Hawaii Press, Hackett Publishing, Norton, Bloomsbury Academic, History for the 21st Century, and the World History Gazetteer. And then I'm going to hand it off to Trevor to present the awards.
So folks, I just want to say, you know, in my opening address, I thanked everybody who made this conference possible. I want to thank you all. Again, I do want to say to all of you, if you haven't gotten enough of this and you want to be really involved before we all meet again in Seoul, Korea, you too can spend 4 hours in a hotel room talking about next year's conference by becoming an officer. If you're interested, talk to Jonathan Reynolds over there. By joining the council, same thing. And also you can talk to Jonathan or to me about being on a committee. We really need the committees to help plan the program, to help plan future conferences, to help plan teaching and research, and also to communicate this to even more folks so that we have big, healthy, wonderful, lovely conferences. So if you want to join in, talk to Jonathan. You can't miss Jonathan. He's 8'4". And now, without further ado, it is a great honor to introduce our closing keynote speaker, Hannah Drake. Hannah is a Louisville writer, activist, poet, and speaker, the author of 11 books. It may now be 12. I wasn't sure about that. No, 11's right. Okay, good. She was also awarded the Muhammad Ali Center's Daughter of Greatness Award, and in 2023 was inducted into the Kentucky Women Remembered. In 2024, she was the recipient of a Living the Vision Award. She has both received an honorary doctorate in humanities from Simmons College of Kentucky and is also a Kentucky colonel. I'm going to pause there because that's quite a range of things to be. Right now, she is currently the co-executive director, and chief creative officer of the artist-run nonprofit Ideas X Lab. And today is her birthday. Well, I'm hoping she'll be able to stay for a little bit of the reception at least so we can sing to her. But that's up to her. But I don't want to waste any time. I firmly believe that the World History Association benefits from a sense of place. And I cannot think of a better person to give us a sense of Louisville, of Kentucky, of the connections of the world to the local than Hannah Drake. Please, Colonel Drake.
Thank you, everyone. Can I move this? Oh, okay. It is difficult to stand in spaces Spaces that weren't designed for me. Spaces that were not created for people that look like me. Spaces that scream, you do not belong here. Spaces that feel like sandpaper against my blackness, coarse and rough and painful and uneasy. Spaces that are void of signs, but still I can see them hanging in a not so distant memory. Signs that separated water fountains and restaurants, blatantly reminding people that these spaces were not made for them. And although the signs no longer remain, the architecture and atmosphere is constructed in such a way that I know and we know that these are not our spaces. We are simply standing in borrowed time to entertain the master's masses. It is difficult to stand in these spaces and be me, fully me. Code switching my vernacular to make you feel comfortable. Why must my life dress itself up in discomfort for you to feel at ease? Why must my hair look a certain way in these spaces? Why is my gender an issue in these spaces? Why does my skin feel so heavy in these spaces? You see, these are spaces I no longer want to reside in. I do not enjoy being in these spaces. I no longer want to subject myself to these spaces, but then I am reminded. As I stand in these spaces and I see the faces of these two little black girls watching me perform in awe, because I am a woman with kinky hair like them and skin that looks like theirs and lips that look like theirs, standing in these spaces. Spaces that have been designed in ways that have spoken to them at an early age, reminding them, baby, some spaces just ain't for your kind. You see, that is why I'm in these spaces, being a shout in these spaces. It is for every black person that has ever entered a room and wondered, would anyone look like them in these spaces? It is for every LGBTQ person that has wondered, could they safely be themselves in these spaces? It is for every woman that has stood at the hetero boardroom table wondering, would she be considered equal in these spaces? It is for every Muslim woman that has wondered, could she wear her hijab in these spaces? You see, I remember those that stood in spaces not made for them, that marched on roads not paved for them, that sat down on seats in buses not earmarked for them, that sat down at counters and endured the humiliation of sitting in spaces so that one day I too could stand in these spaces. You see, that is why I'm in these spaces. It is for everyone that came before me, that sipped water at the colored only fountain, that marched into integrated schools and knew they would be just one of 9. It is for every black performer that stood on stages so that one day little black kids could know that they too could stand on stages. It is for my mother that stood in the space of a cotton field picking cotton for 80 cents a day. It is for everyone that will come after me, for them to know that they have a right to be in these spaces, to have a seat at the table, in these spaces to have a voice, in these spaces to have influence, in these spaces. You see, that is why I stand in these spaces even when it makes me uncomfortable. And now some of you sit looking at me, and now you feel uncomfortable. But today you have heard me. You cannot unsee me. In this space, I belong. In this space, we are here, and we belong here in this space. Thank you. As a writer and a poet, I've been fortunate enough to speak all over this country. I have written hundreds of poems for almost every occasion. However, no matter where I go in this country, that poem is my most requested poem ever, because everyone has felt they didn't belong at some point in their lives. Everyone understands how it feels to be in a space, and for whatever reason, you know that the space was not designed for you. What I really wanted to express in that poem is that no one needs to tell you that you are not welcome here. It is simply understood, and it's often understood because of the architecture and the atmosphere that is set in the space. You know immediately that the space was never designed with you in mind. The space was never designed for your comfort. And sadly, many people that designed the space know it too. It is exactly why they designed it that way. Many of us are in the space of America. And I know that this is world history. But there is something happening right now in America that as historians, it is our obligation to speak to what is happening in this country. And many of us are standing in the space of America right now. And America is letting you know that this space was not designed for you. However, I am a firm believer that wherever I place my feet is where I'm supposed to be. It is exactly why a few years ago I found myself in the Cherokee Triangle. It is a beautiful neighborhood right here in the city, and in that neighborhood, they had a Confederate statue of an officer named John B. Castleman. He was right at the center of the Cherokee Triangle, and I really do love that area because it is so beautiful and so walkable. But I never felt comfortable being in that space because of the statue. The statue told me something without anyone in that community needing to whisper a word to me. But as things started to change here in Louisville, there was a report by the Louisville Public Arts and Monument Advisory Committee that determined that this statue that towered above a city street gives the impression that the city celebrates the entire life of the figure depicted, and it should be removed because it was no longer possible to reconcile the monument's message with the values of this city. It was determined that the statue would be removed in 2018. However, it was not removed until June of 2020, just weeks after Louisville began protesting the murder of local resident Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old black woman who was killed in her home by the Louisville Metro Police Department. When I heard the statue had come down, my daughter and I got in our car and we went to where the statue once stood. The statue was erected in 1913 and had been in place for over 100 years. Several times it was defaced, and now it was finally gone, and it's going to be relocated to a burial site. I got out of my car and I saw the empty platform where the statue of this Confederate officer once towered, and around the platform there were flowers and there was a sign that said Black Lives Matter, and for once it was like I got to see the mountain crumble. While I know many argue that councilmen went on to denounce enslavement, history is still history. I stood in front of the empty platform and recited the poem I just recited for you, Spaces, and by the time I was finished, people had started coming out of their homes to surround me. I remember there was a woman pushing her little baby in a carriage, and she stopped to listen. By the time I was finished, people were weeping. When I discussed that moment later, I told them to remember what they felt that day when I recited that poem. And they have the power as a community to put things in their community that make people feel welcome and make people feel as if they belong there. Understand that what we decide to place as monuments is what we are saying is valued and important. When the National Monument Audit produced by Monument Labs in partnership with the Mellon Foundation assessed the current monument landscape across the United States, they studied 50,000 monuments in 2021. It found that the most common feature among the monuments discussed was war and conquest. Only 0.5% of the recorded monuments represented enslaved people or any abolitionist efforts. Of the 5,917 recorded monuments, only 1% mentioned the history of enslavement. Of the 1,690 recorded monuments that mentioned the Confederacy, only 3% mentioned defeat. Of the 916 recorded monuments, only some 15% mentioned the word pioneer and Native American and indigenous together. The commemorative landscape is dominated by monuments to figures most would consider to be white, male, and wealthy. The top 50 represented individuals included 11 U.S. presidents and 12 U.S. generals. Half of the top 50 list enslaved other people. More than a third were born into a family of wealth. 76% owned land. Only 5 of the top 50 figures that we have made monuments to were Black or indigenous. There were no U.S.-born Latinx, Asian, Pacific Islander, or self-identified LGBTQ people in the top 50 list. The study also found that historical monuments men grossly outnumber those next to historical women. Only 3 women were represented in the top 50 list. And feminized bodies also appeared in the sanctioned monument landscape as fictional or mythological. For example, there were 22 monuments that depicted mermaids, and there were only 3 that depicted U.S. Congresswomen. These stats tell me immediately, without anyone saying one word, what America values and what America deems as worthy as being remembered. But there is so much left out of America's story. There is so much left out of what America chooses to call history and what America chooses to preserve. Several years ago, I traveled to Mississippi for work, and I started touring plantation homes in Natchez, Mississippi. And the homes there were stunning. When I say homes, I mean that these were mansions. And many of these mansions still had the original furniture and the original china. In one of the homes, they had the china laid out on the table. And I remember the casserole dish. On the top of it, the handle was shaped like a cotton ball, and it was made out of solid gold. In the home was solid gold chandeliers. It was simply beautiful. But after a while, all the homes started to look alike. And so I asked the tour guide, well, take me where I would have been, because I wouldn't have been in this house. Take me there. And so nonchalantly, she said, oh, Hannah, I can't do that. We bricked all those over, and we turned them into offices. And just like that, history was erased, gone, bricked over, forgotten. But America must understand that we will never progress until we reckon with the bones beneath our feet. It made me wonder who gets to decide what is worth preserving, who gets to decide what is written in the history books, who gets to decide what will be added to the archives, who gets to decide what will be in the museums, who gets to make the decision about whose history is worth saving. It says a lot when you keep the mansions, yet destroy the quarters of the people who built the mansions, and not just destroy the dwellings, but then write history as if these people never existed. But America must understand we will never progress until we are ready to face our history here. Right here in Kentucky, we will never grow unless we are honest about what is buried underneath the bluegrass. I looked at the agenda for this conference, and the days were filled with so many interesting workshops. And I'm sure you have and you will visit many places in Louisville. But I want to be honest with you. I grew up listening to Paul Harvey. You said it was my birthday. I know I don't look like. I grew up listening to Paul Harvey. But I did. Love me some Paul Harvey. And Paul Harvey, y'all know, tell you a little news story, a little anecdote. And then Paul would say, and now, here's the rest of the story. And I'm here to tell you the rest of the story about Louisville, Kentucky. You cannot step foot in Louisville without seeing and hearing all about bourbon. Kentucky is the bourbon capital of the world. Evan Williams is known as Kentucky's first distiller, and he established his distillery in 1783. But we know that enslaved people worked in distilleries and contributed significantly to the bourbon industry. They had the skill set with things that they had learned in Africa. So while there is no historical record given the time, we can assume that it's highly probable that enslaved people played a role in Williams' distilling process, or perhaps you have tried some Elijah Craig bourbon. Elijah Craig was an enslaver, and enslaved people ran the distillery and all of the broader operations. Yet when you hear the story of bourbon in Kentucky, rarely, if ever, do they mention the enslaved people that contributed to this industry. Perhaps you have heard of Churchill Downs, where the greatest 2 minutes in sports take place. You cannot come to Kentucky and really fully experience the Kentucky without trying a mint julep every Kentucky Derby. About 120,000 mint juleps are sold at $22 each. That's about $2.6 million. But what is often missing from that story is that Tom Bullock, who lived in Kentucky, who was the son of formerly enslaved people, wrote the recipe for the mint julep. Yet in 1927, there is no more record of Tom Bullock. Or maybe you have heard of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Lewis and Clark crossed, the western portion of the country after the Louisiana Purchase. They are remembered in history as great explorers. Yet there was another person on the expedition with them who was often left out of the story, and that is an enslaved man named York. York was an explorer, a hunter, and likely the first African American to cross the continent with such a significant contribution to history. And to this day, no one knows where he is buried to honor his legacy. Or perhaps they showed you the beautiful Galt House downtown that overlooks the Ohio River. But before it was the Galt House, there was a little store there. And an enslaved man named Thornton Blackburn was hired out to work in that store. And Thornton got word that his wife, Lucy, was going to be sold down the river to the deep south. And they decided to head to Canada for their freedom. And when they got to Canada, they started a cab services. The cabs were red and yellow. And to this day, the cabs to honor Thornton and Lucy Blackburn are red and yellow. When you talk about not extraditing people back from Canada, this is birthed out of the Blackburns because they said they didn't commit a crime, because seeking your own liberation should never be a crime. And tomorrow, some of you are going to go on the Belle of Louisville. I've been on the Belle of Louisville many times. You are going to sail along the Ohio River. It is going to be beautiful. It is going to be stunning. But the full story of the Ohio River is that Kentucky trafficked in human cargo. Kentucky sold 80,000 people down the Ohio River. That's where the phrase comes from. Kentucky did that. Kentucky enslaved almost 250,000 people. That is what happened in Kentucky. These are just some of the things that my old Kentucky home may not tell you. This is just the tip of the iceberg of history in Kentucky. But now I must ask you, now that you know those things, Did the world stop turning? Did anything happen? Did the sky fall down? You are a better person because you now know this history. But there are some people that would have you believe that knowing all of the story somehow takes something away from you, takes something away from America. But we do not become better by ignoring history. We become better by facing and learning our history. You all are having a conference at a time when history is under siege. Not because it is false, but because it is finally being told in full, and that makes people uncomfortable. But let me be clear, we do not tell the full history to shame this country. We tell it to shape it into something better. We tell the full history because truth without context is just another form of erasure. We tell the full history because healing cannot take place where lies are buried. We tell the full history because we deserve, and the generations that come after us deserve more than half-truths and whitewashed pages. To leave out the history of enslavement, the stolen lands, the systems of oppression, to ignore the brilliance and resistance, the black leaders, the indigenous warriors, the immigrant builders, the freedom fighters. It is to silence the soul of this nation. We have done a great job at hiding what we do not want to acknowledge. We have done a great job at crafting history that does not tell a complete story, but history is like a scrambled egg. Once you scramble an egg, you will never be able to unscramble it. It's over. It will never be a fresh yolk again. It is done. We cannot change what has happened in our past, but we can use it to change the trajectory of our future. History is the past. But I want you all to know that history is being created today. When we hear the words history, we often think of yellowed pages and dust-covered books and statues of men that are in stone and moments long gone. But let me tell you the truth. History isn't just behind us. History is happening in this moment, right here in this room with your choices. Every protest, every poem, every policy, every conference, every march, every mural, every no more, every voice that is raised to telling the truth, that is history. We are not just descendants of history. We are the designers of it. We, the people, are the architects of what can be. We don't just honor the past. We are responsible for the future that someone else will remember one day. There is an African proverb that says, until the lion has his own historian, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. What I need, what we need, what America needs, and the reason I am here on my birthday, I need you all as historians to be the lion. I need you to uphold history with integrity. If you only tell the stories that make you proud, you are not telling history. When we dare to tell it all, the blood, the beauty, the brutality, the breakthroughs, that's when we make room for justice. We make space for reckoning. We begin the work of repair, and I know it is not easy. There are some wounds from history that still ache. There are some chapters in our history that many of us just want to skip over. But if we don't face the fire, we will never find the light. So tell the truth, the whole truth, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Because only when we tell the full history can we begin to write a future that is not rooted in lies, but it is rooted in truth, and it is worthy of everyone being remembered. One day, we will all be gone from here. And what will they say about us? Will they say that we were afraid to speak? Will they say that we chose comfort over courage? Will they say that we closed our eyes while injustice stood wide open? Or will they say that we were the historians that dared? The ones who stood up, the ones who said, no more hiding, no more denying, the truth matters. History isn't waiting on a hero. History is simply waiting on you. So tell the truth and share it boldly and share it unapologetically, because one day when they ask, what did they do when the world was on fire? Let the answer be that they built something beautiful from the ashes. Like Dr. King said, we are now faced with the fact, my friends, that tomorrow is today. And we are confronted with the fierce urgency and now in this unfolding conundrum of life and history. There is a such thing as being too late. Let us not be the historians that we're too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time. Life often leaves us standing bare, naked, and dejected with lost opportunity. The tide in the affairs of men does not remain at the flood, it ebbs. We may cry out desperately for time to pause in our passions, but time is adamant to every plea and rushes on over the bleached bones and jumbled residue of numerous civilizations are written the pathetic words, too late. There's an invisible book of life that faithfully records our vigilance or our neglect. The moving finger writes, and having writ moves on. What will we write? And what will be written about us? We are the history makers, right here and right now. So let's tell it, and let's be it, and tell the full story that this nation and this world and the next generations to come deserve. Thank you.
Hey, folks, I got to tell you the truth. In my opinion, that's the greatest keynote I've ever heard at a conference. And it's going to have legs. I'm a little unsure what to do, because is that like, do we take questions after that? Because, I mean, many of us are sitting and cogitating, I think, and taking that as a challenge and a charge for the future in our teaching and in our writing. I'm going to open the floor to questions. If there are out there, and I see there are many. So I'm just going to turn this over to you.
There's quite a bit. Oh, thank you. First of all, I just want to thank you for speaking with the urgency and the passion that we need. There have been some times here and in the classroom where I've not felt that the adults around me have brought that urgency, and it's just such a relief. And thank you again.
Thank you.
And a question, I loved your poem Spaces, and I related to it in a way I'm not sure you intended. When I was a child, I was very fat, and I have a lot of memories of being in playgrounds and like jungle gyms, stuff like that, where I felt that the infrastructure would literally crumble under my weight, and that it was not built for me in that very literal way. So I wondered if you could speak a little bit on how the themes you talked about in that poem could relate to fatness. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I think, as I said, I think that poem is so popular because everyone's going to relate at some point where they didn't fit in. And I was strategic in writing when I said the architecture. I literally mean how things are built. No one needed to tell you this. What's your name? Bobby. No one needed to say, Bobby, this playground equipment's not made for you. You knew it immediately. You knew, so no one ever needs to tell you because it is designed, they have designed it. And in their minds, right, and sometimes you need to, they just have blinders on. Some people just have blinders on, right? And they're designing a thing, and you're obese, or I don't know what the right word, aren't part of this equation. You know, children, I'm just making all this up, 50 pounds and under, that's part of the equation. You're not even seen, right? And so, but it's like that often, and I have actually recited that poem for actual architects. And one day I went to, it's like a major architect firm here in Louisville, and they, like all these awards on the wall, and they want me to look at this outdoor space they're designing. And they've already designed it, you know, and it looks real pretty. And in like 2 minutes, I look at it, and I said, where are the bathrooms? But I was around the table with all these architects, most of them weren't toting their children or something around to go to the bathroom. And I'm like, well, I want to go to the bathroom, don't you? And they said, we never even thought about it, right? Because oftentimes they may not be the ones that's out doing the stuff. So oftentimes you have to remind people, and if people, I try to tell people, if you start with equity at the foundation of a thing, like the curb cut effect, they put the curb cut in for people in wheelchairs, well, it benefited everyone, right? So if you have a stroller, if you have packages and you have a dolly, right? So it benefits, when you do something often, for the least of those, or who you consider marginalized, it benefits everybody. That's what people need to see. So if they had to design the playground in such a way, it would benefit you and everybody else. But most people don't start with equity at the foundation. Sadly, often they start with who can we leave out of this thing. Yeah. But I hope that you now feel that wherever you go, Bobby, you are supposed to be. You are supposed to be there. And some of us are called to make space for other people that are going to come behind us, right? So I just want you to feel that way. Wherever you go, wherever you place your feet is where you're supposed to be, okay?
I just want to say that I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you.
In that. And I love the challenge of it all. But one of the elements of it that spoke to me most was when you were talking about places as beautiful, right? They're beautiful places. And yet there's horror behind them. And that's so much, so much of what drives me as a historian is the contrast, because the very worst parts of human history, you got to face them just because they're bad. But you also have to face them, or you have to look into them, because that's where you see people being the most resilient and often the most beautiful in the face of all that horror. So thank you for presenting it the way you did.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That's the contrast of even speaking about Kentucky And I tell people all the time, I'm always criticizing Kentucky, they say, I said, it's like Baldwin said about America. I love Kentucky. Once I stop criticizing Kentucky, then I really don't care anymore. But I want to continue to challenge Kentucky. For all, like, what does it hurt for Kentucky to be the bourbon capital of the world? What would Kentucky break off and fall into some invisible ocean surrounding it if it said, and enslaved people made the bourbon too? Oh, okay. Pour a drink. Let's drink. You know, like, I mean, who was that going to harm to know that? You know, where we're at now, and sadly, I know I keep talking America, I know it's the world history, but tends to, what happens in America sometimes goes to other places. And we act as if we say it, it's an abomination to America. Than to just openly say, enslaved people help make bourbon. Kentucky can own up and say, we sold 80,000 people down the Ohio River. Oh, now we know that, right? And so me and Josh Miller, we started the Unknown Project to start finding the names of enslaved people. And a woman sent me an email. She heard about the project, she sent me an email. And she said, I've had this ledger in my family since the 60s. And I said, okay, what's in the ledger? And she said, they're the name of 50 people that my family enslaved. I want to give you these names. And I said, okay, thank you, right? And I said, you held on to this. I mean, this was just a couple of years ago. She gave this to me. Since the 60s, you held on to this. Passed down in your family. Now you have set those people free. And now you don't need to carry around this invisible shame that you're holding on to, that no one's asking you to hold on to. You can free yourself as well. So sometimes facing the beauty and the ugly is freeing for everybody. And that's the part we need to get to. We are still bound because we don't face the truth. One thing that I have found out doing this work, even finding my family, is the unknown will become known. Eventually, it will become known. And so let's stand on the right side of history. Just tell the full story, and all will be better for it. Now you all can go to your reception, you'll sip some bourbon and say, oh, did you know that enslaved people helped distill bourbon in Kentucky? Oh, okay, that's great knowledge. Thank you for sharing that with us. Next drink. Okay. It's okay. I want people to know it's okay. History, it's okay. It's not a tool to divide us. Yeah.
Hello. I just want to say very quickly, I really appreciated your speech, and especially the call to action that you gave during it. I know we have a large mixture of historians, but especially as an academic historian studying here in Louisville, I'm struck by the amount of kind of incredible research that I've seen here over the weekend, but also the realization that, your average everyday person isn't attending conferences like this. So as someone from outside of academia, especially here in Louisville, how do you kind of talk to us, or what tips do you have for us kind of academic historians who wish to better reach the public and make sure that they are seeing this kind of research and these questions being asked?
I think what would be wonderful is for people like yourself to work with artists. An artist can break down history, and I tell, especially, I tell students that I work with, to be a great writer, you must be an amazing reader. And even in that poem Spaces, I talk about, I remember those that stood in spaces not made for them, that marched on roads not, that's history. Or the signs that separated water fountains and restaurants, or to say that walked into integrated schools and knew they would be just one of 9. Clearly, I'm talking about the Little Rock 9. So I take something historical, I'm just gonna take it and make it poetic, so people clearly understand it. And nowadays, with everything you can do online, short videos, what I have found, even we just had Juneteenth, right? And so in Kentucky, and everyone's Juneteenth. And then me, you know, Hannah, you gonna come spoil that? I sure am. You know, there was Emancipation Proclamation, Juneteenth. Like, well, you do know that Kentucky was a border state. So, so the enslaved people weren't free, you know, and people were stunned. I just shared in a little paragraph, and it started going viral because people were hungry for information and history. But I'm always thinking about how can I use edutainment, education and entertainment, to get them these bite-sized nuggets, because now everything's bite-sized, right? You know, everything's, can you say it in TikTok time, right? So you gotta say it quickly and give people the history, you know, in a bite-sized section. And then, oftentimes they will come and start looking things up, our thirst for knowledge. Your job, if you do that, and in all of our jobs, just plant the seed. All I did was plant a little seed about, well, you know, Kentucky was a border state, and when that happened, you know, people were still in. And then people, I didn't know that. How do you know? Now I need to send you to go look for the information. This is where you can really go read more about it, right? So you're like just kind of hooking them in. So if you can do that, and it could be singing, it could be dance. We did a play and used the narratives of enslaved women from Kentucky. You probably all have seen all the speed stuff. And actually, I wrote that poem Spaces because I was performing at the Speed and didn't feel like I belonged there. So I went home and wrote that poem because that's where I was. But then now I've since, and I said, oh, if they don't invite me back, I don't care. And then, but they have invited me back many, many, many times. But we did a play about enslaved women, and we went to Farmington, where the Speed family enslaved, you know, over 100 people, you know, and people didn't even understand because they take the students on a field trip to Farmington. People just think it's a really nice house. Like, y'all won't talk about the people who, y'all want to discuss that at all? You know, so we did this play, and people came to Farmington to see the play, and we used the narratives of women that were actually enslaved at Farmington. And we just told the real story. The beauty of this is I told you the Speed family, right? I called Virginia Speed, a descendant of the Speed, and she said I would be honored to support this play in any way that I can, and she has, because she knew there is this beauty there. Yeah, everyone talks about Lincoln and, you know, friends with Speeds, and he's there. That's the beauty, right? There's also this other story. And they said, Hannah, should we tear the house down? I said, what the house do? House do? What? Tear it down for what? Would the house do something? You know, no, don't. You keep it and talk about the people who lived in the house as well. You don't need to tear anything down. You give it context in the bigger picture of the Speed plantation. Talk about everything. You don't need to throw anything away. I want it all, so we can learn it all. The good, the bad, the ugly, the enslavement, freedom, all of it. You know, so I think that's important. So I know I kind of veered off, but certainly if you can, work with artists. If you're on a campus, get your theater department. Artists, singers, dancers, all of it, yeah.
Hannah, that was a great response. I want to say I feel solidarity with you because I've ruined many a family Hanukkah and Passover with history. And my wife will tell you that's not a joke. That is true. I've done that.
You can help yourself, kid. You gotta say it.
No, that's right. But I wanted to push you just a little bit further on that incredible answer, because one of the spaces, and it's a space where some people also don't feel welcome, but a space that's really important to us as world historians is the classroom. And if you can tell us what you've learned about engaging and drawing young people in to history as well, I think that would be useful for us.
I've been in many classrooms here in Kentucky, and we also used art, and we created a coloring book with women that helped shape Kentucky. Some have passed on and some are still living. What I found interesting with young people, I take them down to the Unknown Project, I start telling them about the history of enslavement in Kentucky, and I promise you, without fail, they always say, why did I never learn this in school? Why? Young people are hungry for the truth. And here's the thing with young people. I know, like I said, it's my birthday, I'm a little bit older. There is no fooling young people anymore. They're all walking around with a computer in their hands. You know, you can't, the story, the lie doesn't work anymore. They can just Google it. They can just chat GPT it now, and it's all, the truth is gonna come up. And so it is important. Young people value truth. Young people can handle the truth. It is us, as adults, doing all the stuff. And the young people are begging to know history, to learn things. And so please, if you can, engage young people and try to make it relatable to where they're at right now. Like when I have this poem formation, I'll just say a few lines. So I said, hold on, I'll think about. Okay, so I say, this is for, okay, I have to say the whole thing, but I'll tell you some formation. Said firmly with no hesitation. Concern for your tears, recently went on vacation. We are unbothered by your hating and your condemnation. It is simply confirmation and the very reason we're celebrating. This is the manifestation of a bloodline that birthed a nation. We ain't offspring, we're the foundation of creation. When you sip from Mother Earth, you're drinking our libations. This is lyrical liberation. You want to be mad at something? Be mad at the blood on the hands of this nation. This is the reincarnation of a spirit that has no expiration. This is old Negro spiritual salvation. That down south church fan waving congregation. This is B's Blackfish standing on Rock Nation. But since you seem to need some clarification, this is for 40 acres and a mule reparations, for picking cotton in fields with no compensation, for not telling slaves about emancipation, for Rosa being told to get in the back of your transportation, for Sarah Bartman's humiliation at the hands of your exploitation. So I say all this stuff, and they love it. And I tell them that was all history. Yeah. All of it. Every line was some historical fact. And I just dressed it up in a way that young people are like, whoa, right? You can use history anyway, any way to hook young people in, as long as, you know, it's something engaging. They will connect with it, as long as it's the truth. Everyone loves truth, ultimately. It may make them uncomfortable, but people don't want to be lied to. Young people want to know the truth. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we could take one last question, if there's one out there. You just heard Sarah Bartman, that's why you... No, I'm kidding.
Thank you for everything you've said. And I'm hanging on your last claim that people don't want to be lied to. But I don't believe that about the wider country I live in today. I think there are a lot of people who want to be lied to. And I think you probably have thoughts on that.
I do have thoughts on that. I think, you know, here's the thing. People will not like the truth at times often because it doesn't feel good, right? But it ultimately is good for you, and people know that. They know that. And sometimes people can rest in a bed of lies. They can. But I still, and maybe I'm just strange for wanting to believe, that the truth is what will set people free. And I have had people come back to me, and it's been years later, and said, Hannah, I am sorry. And you were right, and I treated you wrongly for saying X, Y, Z. That it may take time for them to get to that point. Like I was telling him, my job is to plant a seed of truth. That's my job. Everybody, when you plant something, you may not see it to the end, right? And for many people, what they are believing is their truth. And we come in and tell them something different. And we are breaking down something that they have probably believed in all of their lives, chipping away at it. But I am just a firm believer. It's like when you go to the doctor. I may not like what you are going to say, but I need to hear the truth, because the truth is what may save my life. And you lying to me is not going to help me. So I think while people on the surface, it seems like they want to not believe, it's because they don't want to wrestle with the discomfort. That's the part. That doesn't feel good. That makes me uncomfortable. There is no other way. There is no other way. America and what we are facing, we're gonna have to face the truth. That's the only way to save America, to save our world, is by facing, and it's not gonna feel good. And this is what I tell people all the time, and then I'm done. Who told you it will feel good? Who promised you that? Who promised you it was gonna feel good to hear about enslavement? I cry all the time. I'm horrified by what other human beings did to other human beings. It doesn't feel good for me either. But I must face it. No one promised me it would feel good. All I can promise you today and the next day and the day after, that's the truth. That's all I got to give you. Yeah.
Thank you. And with that note, we'll thank our speaker once again.
Thank you all so much.